Okay, I hope everyone can see the screen. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger there. So I'm sharing with you the website for the African Union for Housing Finance. That is auhf.co.za. And if you go to the tab under activities, there is a bar here, capacity building and professional development. And if you click on that, it'll take you to the AUHF Academy. And that's where you can find some more information out about what the AUHF Academy is and what we're trying to do. I think, as we've said in previous sessions, this is an experiment. We're trying to find a way to create a collaborative space of learning and teaching and sharing among professionals interested in affordable housing across Africa. It is available for free, but AUHF members get to sign up explicitly for the Academy to get a certificate if they attend a particular number of classes. We're going to work out the sustainability of this program going into the future. But we do like to make things open and available in the public domain because we believe that's quite important just to foster productive conversation across all of us around these issues. We are building the affordable housing sector across the continent as we are watching it and in it. So we're building this plane as it flies. So this is an important process of how we learn from one another, and how we share our experiences. And we're hoping that the Academy creates a bit of structure to that exercise. So take a look at it on our website, and you can see here the objectives around knowledge sharing, peer learning, practical application, and then a continental perspective. Some of these sessions will be in French. We're also exploring a Portuguese series, a small one as well. If we can find a way to afford translation, we'll make them bilingual. But in the absence of that, we'll just do them in the languages that the speakers are able to present in and then target those particular participants. This is the first series that we've been hosting, which is on housing microfinance. And I'll introduce Bezant and Stephen shortly when we get started. But it's a three-part series. Three parts, right, Bezant? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Three-part series. Really designed to set out, well, what is housing microfinance? How does it work? What are the challenges and opportunities that exist? And we really hope that you'll engage with us, both by asking questions and taking a look at some of the material that's produced and maybe responding to that. I don't know if some of you received the reading list that was sent out after the last session. So there are various ways in which you can become involved and engaged, and we really do want to hear from you. So we're sitting in session 2, institutional readiness, product design, and operational requirements. And then next month, we'll look at scaling housing microfinance from pilot to portfolio, which is both a very local ask for a company, and also it's a continental ask because that's really what we need for affordable housing in Africa to go forward. We also are planning, we have here, you've got a list of all of the different documents that we're putting into our library. The ones at the moment all relate to housing microfinance. And we're very excited about this. If there's a document that you want to share, send it to us and we'll include it here too. And what we'll do is include it as a link to your website so that there is this ongoing sharing and collaboration. And then further webinars, future webinars, whether it's a once-off or a series, we'll let you know about that. That communication will come from Tandiwe and Nasipi. So I'm going to, oh, one other thing I have to say while we're on the website. While you go there, why not click this button here? Join the AUHF. There are lots of benefits, and besides being able to communicate and engage as a collective, makes a big difference to our ability to provide services to the community. So we would be really grateful if you would check that out. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and just see. Are we ready to start now, do you think? It's very nice to have you all here. My name is Kesia Rust, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. And we are the Secretariat to, oh, I have to move this way, there we go, the African Union for Housing Finance, which is an industry body that represents now almost 70 organizations and individuals across 23 countries in Africa. Please join us if you haven't already. It's a really nice industry grouping. We have a meeting every year in person, and then a whole lot of these kinds of meetings in between the large annual conference, which this year is happening in Zambia, in Lusaka, from the 10th until the 13th of November. This is the second in our AUHF Academy series on housing microfinance, which is hosted jointly by Bezant Chongo from Symbiotics and Stephen Wanjala, both who work very often in a lot of detail in different ways in the housing microfinance sector. I've worked with Bezant and Stephen, well, for decades, and that's all we'll say. And so there's good experience in this room. And I really encourage you to challenge them to get beyond the presentation and into some of the meat that you're curious about. Please put your questions in the chat, and either Stephen, I think Stephen will be moderating that discussion later. Otherwise, I'm happy to step into. Bazant, over to you.
Thank you, Keisha. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly honored to have this opportunity again to engage with. Hopefully, most of you did join the first webinar some 3 weeks ago. As Keisha had introduced, the webinar is a part of a three-part series looking at housing microfinance. In the first session, we really did a deep dive and introduction, trying to get to a common understanding of what housing microfinance is. So session one was on the what, and for today, we're going to go into a bit more of the detail in terms of the how we actually deliver into housing microfinance. The session is predominantly going to be led by my colleague Stephen. Stephen is in the field, so I would understand if maybe he does have some challenge in terms of just facilitating our session. Fortunately, that's why we have the two of us. So for today, we're going to go into quite a bit of detail into how it is that you do deliver housing microfinance. And to contextualize that a bit, just to say that I've been working in the field of financial inclusion, microfinance for the last 2 decades or so. And in the context of financial inclusion, we focus not only on providing access to finance for livelihoods of low-income individuals, households, or communities, but that decent affordable housing is an important consideration in terms of livelihoods. And it's in that regard that the organization that I work with, Symbiotics, which is an impact investor providing debt financing into emerging markets, we not only look at access to finance for livelihoods, which is for small businesses or smallholder farmers, but with the understanding that affordable housing is important in terms of providing a holistic livelihoods context. So we do then also provide debt financing to facilitate affordable access to capital for housing. But alongside that also is the technical assistance, which is an important consideration or component of housing microfinance. It's from that background that I've had the opportunity to work with Stephen, Keisha, and other experts in the field. And that is what we'll be drawing on today as a continuation from the session we had 3 weeks ago. And Stephen predominantly leading from his decades of experience. Stephen, over to you.
Good afternoon, all team. I'm housing expert. I've been in the housing microfinance space for the last now 20 years, working with financial institutions, preparing them to get into the housing microfinance product development. So essentially, what do we mean by what readiness of getting into housing microfinance demands? Essentially, there are four entry pathways that an institution can choose to go in, and we'll be going into that details. Then we'll also be looking at the five operational pillars, which looks at governance, which looks at what aspects we'll be looking at. We're looking at which are the various institutions that can enter into housing microfinance. Then we'll also be looking at what it takes to design effective housing microfinance products. Then we'll also look at what is the institutional and operational requirements that are required for an institution to say move to this space. So be looking at the ecosystem support, because when you get into housing space, you are getting to work with various actors, and it's important that an institution understands the ecosystem that it's getting into. Then we'll also be sharing some of the lessons from the field on what are some of the lessons learned working with institutions, supporting them to venture into responsibility.
I'm assuming I'm not the only one struggling to hear Stephen.
He is breaking up a bit, Bezant. Maybe you should take over. It looks like he's just dropped off. Can you take over for a bit?
Sure. I think that was the fallback plan. Yes.
Mhm.
So as Stephen was saying, for really this first part of our discussion, I just want to get into a bit of context in terms of what institutional readiness means. Before you can go into having launching a new product, you have the product idea, in this case, housing microfinance. There needs to be some introspection to understand at what level of maturity or in its evolution that the institution is for it to consider taking on a housing microfinance product. And this is in the context that when you adopt a housing microfinance product, there needs to be some changes that would need to be made in your institution to ensure that it has got the right capacity from an infrastructure perspective, from skills and technology to be able to adopt the new product, in this case, a housing microfinance product. So when we talk of housing microfinance, what actually changes? In terms of at a very high level, the five essential elements that would really need to change is that there will need to be a shift in terms of how it is that the institution actually assesses the creditworthiness of the borrower. You are lending not to an individual per se, but a household. So this is quite a shift in terms of the approach that the financial institution is going to have to adopt when you consider venturing into housing microfinance. An important component is if you are lending specifically for housing, and sometimes that does mean that you actually get dedicated funding that might be subsidized, then it becomes very important that you're able to monitor and confirm that the funding is actually going to go towards construction. You also have a vested interest to ensure that the quality of the construction is at a certain acceptable level, because this has got repercussions further down the line in terms of the performance of your portfolio. What also changes is that, especially if you are coming from a traditional microfinance institution, is that the tenure of your loans is going to be different. So your portfolio is going to change significantly, and you need to invest in managing this portfolio, which has got longer term loans than you would have had for pure microfinance, especially if it's one driven by group lending. What else changes? Your management information system, the core banking system, would need to be adapted to capture housing specific details. So institutions, especially microfinance institutions, do grapple with just the basic core banking system or MIS. But if you're going to layer on a specific product like housing microfinance, then one of the changes is you need to ensure that your current MIS is adaptable to actually begin to capture specificities around housing microfinance. Then, not to state the obvious, is that there's need to be skills that would need to actually be inculcated, new training that staff would need to go through to understand the new housing microfinance product, and also is the incentives. So from an HR perspective, it's not only the skills, but the incentive scheme might need to consider that a housing microfinance loan, which is of different loan value, different loan tenure, would need to be incentivized differently from your micro enterprise loans, be it group or individual lending. So you've got these significant changes that are going to make that are going to come up in the institution, and you need to be prepared for these changes in the upfront before you consider venturing into housing microfinance. So, in terms of institutions, what are the consequences of when an institution actually invests in being ready for adopting a housing microfinance product as opposed to one that might not really invest in institutional readiness? When the institution ventures into housing microfinance, being ill prepared without taking stock of those changes that I just outlined, the consequences is that from the onset, you're going to have a very weak product uptake. And maybe it might not necessarily be the product design itself, but all the other surrounding considerations or ecosystem. You also then risk loan diversion. In the changes I outlined, for instance, that you need to put in place a loan or construction monitoring system. And this will be important to ensure that funding that is extended for housing, for affordable housing, is not diverted for other purposes. There are many reasons for that, including, as I'd mentioned, for instance, that the funding might be subsidized funding, which is really ring-fenced for housing, and you wouldn't want it to go to other purposes because there's an opportunity cost. But also in terms of the risk management, if the loan was designed, the product was designed for housing, but it's diverted for another purpose, this is going to affect the ability for the borrower to be able to repay back the loan. Limited monitoring. If the institution did not invest in the capacity or the procedures to actually monitor the loan, this is also a consequence of not having been ready at an institutional level to understand the institutional and HR capacity or change in processes that would be required. And portfolio stress just refers to the fact that the loan, the new housing microfinance loan, is going to underperform. And this is not, again, necessarily due to the product per se, but how maybe the design or the processes or the training that is required were not in place before launching the new product. On the flip side, when an institution launches the product only after having having ensured that all the right capacity had been built, there will be better client uptake and outcome, meaning the clients will actually borrow the loan, invest in housing, high quality housing, and improve their housing context. Strong portfolio quality. A happy client is a client who's going to repay their loan. Greater staff ownership because they understand the product they're actually rolling out. They can see how it's performing, how it's impacting also potentially on their own remuneration. Sustainable growth and scalability of the product. You are likely to introduce such a product through a pilot in one region or a specific client segment, but only once you've seen that the uptake is significant, then do you plan to scale up. And again, this also has to be done through a clear scale-up plan that ensures sustainable growth, that the skills, the capacity, and also the capital required has already been secured to support the scaling up of the product. So from a high level, these are the minimum considerations to ensure that you put in place the resources, having done the right gap analysis to understand what gaps the institution has. And then only when the institution is ready, and this could be through, for instance, a technical assistance program, or also through internal skills building, resource mobilization, do you then go forward to actually launch the housing microfinance product. For this section, and this is going to go into a bit more detail with regards to what we had covered in the first webinar 3 weeks ago, is to identify what are the different paths or considerations for different institutions to enter into housing microfinance. And when we think of this in the financial inclusion context, we are talking specifically to a great extent of institutions that are already targeting the low income market segment, like microfinance institutions. We also have, and these would be the non-regulated microfinance institutions, or the ones only involved in providing credit. And then we've got the second category of microfinance institutions, which are actually regulated, or SACCOs. And the differentiator between this category and the first one is that these would all be involved in being able to mobilize savings. Then you've got commercial banks who will be looking to downscale or diversify their portfolio. And then you also have got specialist housing institutions and NGOs. So these four all present a different starting point for entering housing microfinance, and to a great extent because they are serving a different client base to start with, or they've got different resource capabilities, in particular to do with access to capital and also access to expertise that allow them to venture into housing microfinance. So we'll go into each one of these in a bit more detail in terms of then what does that path to entry look like. So for microfinance institutions, which are looking to diversify into housing, the main consideration is that you would find that there's already a latent demand, an existing demand for housing finance in their portfolio. So they will be leveraging the fact that they will be servicing a non-client base, it's existing clients whom there's a strong relationship. And they also already have a very deep understanding of informal households. In microfinance, when we lend, we talk about willingness, affordability, and also which is the capacity for a client to repay back the loan, but also the willingness to repay. And this is an important component that microfinance institutions already leverage by looking at collateral substitutes, the group guarantee systems, for instance. So this deep understanding of informal households and being able to lend to them is an asset that microfinance institutions leverage as they go into into housing microfinance. Also, an important feature of microfinance institutions versus other financial service providers is they've got an established field presence. Microfinance institutions have got foot soldiers. They are loan officers who spend a big chunk of their time in the field assessing their clients' creditworthiness, be it whether it's for micro enterprise or smallholder farmers. So this grassroots presence becomes important when you consider housing microfinance, when it comes to the elements I talked about, for instance, being able to monitor how the loan is actually used. So these are strengths that make housing microfinance a natural path for microfinance institutions to consider. The key requirements, or what it is that they need to add on onto the existing strengths for them to go into housing microfinance, which is not necessarily at the same level when it comes to the existing micro enterprise lending products, is that they'll need to establish relatively stronger internal controls. And that is not to say microfinance institutions do not have internal controls, but the level of controls that will be required as they venture into housing microfinance becomes more significant to some extent because of the relatively higher risk because we are talking about higher loan values and higher loan tenures. I did refer to the need for the institutions to have an improved management information system in place, and equally the need to train staff in the new product, because the skills that are required for micro enterprise lending, which is predominantly group lending, are not necessarily the ones that will be required for rolling out a housing microfinance product. So there will need to be training on the new product and appropriate incentive structures. Again, loan officers tend to be remunerated based on the volume of loans that they're able to lend out over a given time, as well as a good collections rate. However, in housing microfinance, we were talking about slightly lower volumes, but higher loan values and tenure. So the incentive structure would need to be revisited to ensure that it's appropriate for a housing microfinance loan product relative to existing products that a microfinance institution would be having. So this is really just a transition that a traditional microfinance institution would need to make as it goes into housing microfinance. With regards to the other category of the MFIs and SACCOs, and in any case banks also, the reason why housing microfinance becomes a logical product to consider and what it is that they'll be leveraging, predominantly for regulated MFIs and SACCOs, meaning the ones which are deposit taking, it is the relatively lower cost of funds that they will have. They do mobilize savings and they do need to make a return on this savings that is actually sitting on their balance sheet, even more so since they need to pay interest to their members or their clients. So on that basis, being able to invest to have a product on their balance sheet on which they can place their funds, housing microfinance becomes an attractive proposition for them to consider. Even more so, because bank MFIs and SACCOs do have a savings product, it is not uncommon that they would have a form of a savings product, a fixed deposit product that will be used partly as a collateral substitute for a housing microfinance loan. So the fact that they do have savings as part of their offering allows them to get quite creative with the housing microfinance product. Regulated MFIs also, you would find that you would already have stronger governance and regulatory reporting that would be being met. So they would have reporting structures in place that allow them to consider introducing a product which has longer tenure, such as a housing microfinance product. Even more so, other than the financial return of the housing microfinance product, is the developmental impact or social impact that it has. And for this reason, it's able to attract impact investors or funders to a microfinance institution who would be looking to have a contribution towards addressing affordable housing needs in a community. So regulated MFIs and SACCOs are able to leverage these considerations as they go into housing microfinance. On the other spectrum, we've got commercial banks who've got a large balance sheet that would allow them to scale. I did mention as part of the readiness assessment is that an institution would need to assess its ability to mobilize the required capital at the right level in its launch of a housing microfinance product to scale responsibly and sustainably. So financial institutions or banks who've got significant resources, capital to mobilize, do not have that limitation when it comes to how do you scale a housing microfinance product. Then commercial banks who tend to serve really the middle and lower to higher income in any given community are also looking to means of diversifying their market. So introducing a housing microfinance product gets them also to diversify their exposure, that they're not only lending to SMEs, but they're lending to a different market segment of individuals who could be employed or self-employed and running small businesses. And that would be the segment that would benefit from a housing microfinance product. Often, as I had indicated also, is that institutions would need to introduce different underwriting models, that in terms of the risk assessment that they would require for introducing a new product. And this is significantly where banks do get a challenge in servicing low-income market segment, whether we're talking about for micro enterprise lending or housing microfinance, that they tend to use what would be called traditional underwriting models that make use of traditional information around income levels, around asset levels of a potential client, collateral that they would want to use in a housing microfinance context and would not be appropriate. So they do need to, as part of the product design process, really look to adopt different types of underwriting or credit risk assessment. And it's on this basis, when it comes to the last point, that commercial banks are able to leverage different relationships or partnerships. This could be through as part of the supply or value chain of housing microfinance, be it with utility providers, be it with developers or building suppliers. That's with regards to the model or the product that they design to roll out. On the other side is also commercial banks' ability, for instance, to leverage technical assistance. So commercial banks have got significant resources, access, and networks to bring in the right expertise to allow them to roll out a housing microfinance product. So depending on where it is that your starting point is, there are different levers that you can pull on or activate that will allow your entry into the housing microfinance to be more efficient or increase the chances of success. I will pause at this moment just in case there might be any burning questions. See if there's anything in the comments.
I haven't seen any in the comments. You've got quite a nice array of people from so many different countries, Bezant and Stephen. So just note that. And we have Tanzania and Rwanda and DRC and Botswana, South Africa. And there are, yeah,
Great.
so
Really diverse, and I think all presenting very unique contexts of the opportunity and even existing cases of housing microfinance.
exactly. Kenya also there. Thank you, Stella. And then Judith says that they still are digesting it, so the questions will come.
Okay, great. And Stephen, just to confirm if you're here, any contribution at this point? Okay.
I think so far it's okay. So I think my network is almost coming to stable. So I hope it continues behaving going forward.
Okay. Thank you. So on the next few slides, I just want to go into a bit more in terms of the designing effective housing microfinance products. And really the whole point is that the financing should match what it is that the household is trying to build. What does that mean? And maybe even before I move that, when we just look at the picture on the right side there, when we say what is the household trying to build, we established in the first webinar that when you talk about housing microfinance, it's about incremental building or renovations. So from the image here, you could at a glance see the different needs that could be financed. You've got a roof there, you've got the windows, you've got the walls, and at a very high basic level, this is what we're talking about when we say that you have to finance what the household actually is building or needs. In the incremental housing context or housing microfinance, we are first of all looking to build a house incrementally, step by step, but at the same time also we can provide housing, we can provide financing to actually fund a specific use case on already existing house. So when we just look at the five single large value investment options here, where a household might look to finance, and there's roofing repairs and replacement. Repairs or simple upgrades to a home, which could be as basic as maybe having to put a new coat of paint or a first coat of paint for a house which has been built incrementally, and for probably the first couple of years, people have been living in it without having a coat of paint. Extensions to an existing house to add another room, and another room not only for dwelling, but another room potentially to rent out for rental income. In incremental housing, it's very, very common that an household will move into a house which does not have water connected or electricity. So after having moved into a house several months or even years down, when they've been able to probably pay up the first investment, they would be prime candidates for looking to get a loan for sanitation services, for connection to electricity in terms of utilities. And then, of course, the main, when you talk of housing microfinance, the main use case that we're talking about is really building a new house progressively. So understanding all these potential use cases for financing is quite important in the product design. So financing really should align with the specific construction stages and not in terms of trying to finance a whole house, building the whole house in one stage. This becomes important then during the product design stage. If you understand what it is that you're financing, then this is going to inform the loan values. It's going to inform any strategic partnerships you might want to enter into with regards to building material suppliers, any strategic partnerships that the financial institution might want to go into with maybe the municipal service suppliers. So all this is an important consideration during the product conceptualization stage, even if it's only to come and say that the institution is only going to pick one or two of these as a core focus of its financing. But understanding that landscape of the use cases gets to inform what it is that, how it is that the product is going to be designed and rolled out. So this speaks to the fact that venturing into product design needs to be first informed by a certain level of market research to understand the market context of the target clients. In terms of the core product design decisions, there are 5 decisions that shape the effective housing product. As I had just mentioned right now, would be the issue of the loan purpose. We need to clearly define what it is that we are going to be financing. What is it that's going to be constructed? What is it that's going to be purchased? What is it that's going to be upgraded? And then by virtue of that, that's going to inform your loan size. If at a very high level, we've understood that one of the more important use cases is putting roofing on the housing in a given community, you need to establish exactly what it costs to roof a house of a certain size in that community. The loan size, once established, then is going to be informed, that's going to inform the loan tenure. The tenure, when we're saying that we've got a loan size hypothetically of $600, and you want to understand that based on your risk assessment, and in terms of affordability, a loan can only then be able to really run from, say, 6 months to 12 months. So the tenure or the duration of the loan is very much dependent on the loan size. So these elements become quite important in considering what it is that your loan product is going to look like, or your product sheet with regards to purpose, eligible purpose for the loan sizes, what is the minimum maximum loan, and by implication, the maximum duration and minimum duration to ensure affordability for the target clients. Then also an important consideration is what is the disbursement? Are we going to disperse as a single lump sum amount? Are we going to disperse into tranches? Do we disperse into the account of a client? Do we disperse to a service provider or materials provider? And chances are your product is going to have variations of all this. And ultimately, it's also the repayment. You would want to have a repayment structure that fits the cash flow of the household or clients. So as basic as this would seem, in the context of any loan, they need to be well considered when it comes to a housing microfinance product. What differentiates microfinance institutions, as I had alluded to in our first webinar, is really the fact that microfinance institutions do not lend on the basis of collateral. However, at the same time, we are also saying that when it comes to financing for housing, when one gets to think of a traditional mortgage or bond, we think of the fact that the asset that is being financed will need to be used as a guarantee, and you will need to have some form of title or title deeds. However, your typical low-income client or housing microfinance client is not going to have any formal title, or that can be used as a guarantee for the property that is going to be financed either through incremental building or any repairs or upgrades that would be used. So these are just some of the options that housing microfinance then tends to use as alternative to traditional collateral. I refer to the fact that commercial banks or regulated microfinance institutions, by virtue of being able to actually take deposits or savings, are able to use accumulated savings, which could be designed through a structured product, some form of fixed deposit, that can be used as collateral for a housing microfinance loan. What this would look like is that if a client, for instance, wanted to borrow a housing microfinance loan up to, say, the value of $250, it would be typical that the housing microfinance institution would say that the client would need to have at least hold into a deposit of at least $50 in a savings account, basically the equivalent of 20% of the loan value. While this does not secure the whole $250, at least 20% of it is guaranteed. Beyond having the savings balance as a cushion, it also, having a savings account, which the financial institution is able to monitor its behavior, becomes also a basis on which the financial institution uses to assess the creditworthiness of the housing microfinance client. So really having this allows to have a more holistic view of the financial behavior of the client and the household, and helps mitigate the risk of not having any traditional collateral or being able to use the property that is being financed itself as a mortgage. Then the next two elements, which refer to SACCOS guarantees, obviously only in a SACCOS context or group guarantees, is that these are member-based structures where the borrower would belong to a group in which they have been peer-reviewed by the other group members. The other group members have some insights into the financial behavior of the client, and on that basis, they are able to vouch for the borrower in terms of the amount of money that they're going to borrow for housing microfinance purposes in this basis, and say that we vouch that X is worth $100 to be repaid over 6 months. That failing, we are guaranteeing that we'll be able to cover the loan if this member of ours does not pay. This is the fundamental basis on which group lending in housing microfinance operates and can be used on that basis for microfinance institutions which use the group guarantee model. Similarly, for circles, which are member-based organizations, so by virtue of you belonging to this organization or structure, you belong to it because the other members actually have vouched for you that you're trustworthy and have been able to establish and maintain that trust record over time, you would be then eligible to borrow for the housing microfinance loan without necessarily having to have in place any mechanism to show ownership of the property, the house that is being financed, or the financial institution to rely on their ability to take possession of it and dispose of it should you default. With regards to supplier verification, this is related to the product design, where I'd indicated that, for instance, that the loan is not dispersed directly in cash to the borrower, but the funds could be dispersed to a supplier of the building materials. The fact that the supplier is able to provide the tangible building materials and deliver them to a specific location does help mitigate the risk with regards to a client who's going to first either divert the funds or also ensuring or confirming the fixed abode of the client. While none of these models really are perfect, they can all be used in combination to try mitigate risk and be able to extend housing microfinance in a context where otherwise the access to finance would not be possible at all. Alternative means or additional means in which traditional collateral is really replaced in the housing microfinance context is a construction monitoring. I refer to the fact that in housing microfinance, you usually want to confirm that the funds have been used for the construction purpose. Partly, this is achieved by having field officers. Again, this is where microfinance institutions are able to adapt because they already have loan officers who spend the bulk of their time in the field. So the loan officer is able to make site visits to confirm that the funds were used for the intended purpose. Alternative, in terms of proof of occupancy, this is where evidence of land rights are established beyond title deed. When we're talking of, especially in many African countries where land title may be held or established through other traditional means, this might be through, for instance, traditional leadership. All these are mechanisms which are used to establish land rights in the absence of the formal title deeds, then still allowing a financial institution to be able to provide housing microfinance and use any combination of these different modes to try to mitigate risk as opposed to just being able to lend against a traditional title deed. Underwriting for informal households, I did refer to the fact that especially for commercial banks, when they venture into housing microfinance or downscale in microfinance in general, they need to consider that we have alternative methods of underwriting in microfinance. Okay, you can see, I think there's some comments or questions. I'll get to this later, and Stephen can help me navigate those. Yes, so I was referring to the alternative underwriting methods in informal housing or housing microfinance. In microfinance, and I'm talking about traditional microenterprise lending, the microfinance institution, and I mentioned this earlier, is really assessing the cash flows of the total household and not making a credit decision based on proof of income that comes into a bank account or through a bank statement, which is the case in more consumer lending and traditional retail finance. So in housing microfinance and in microfinance in general, the microfinance institution is going to look at different proofs or sources of income beyond a payslip. This would include, for instance, establishing what source of livelihoods does a borrower have. Do they run a small business? Is it a small business which has been in existence? How long has it been in existence? Is there any record of the sales for the small business? And this is what traditional microfinance institution loan officers do. So this same method of assessing the household cash flow is what is used in the housing microfinance context. And we're able to use this also through triangulation of income. As I stated, we're not only looking at the income through a payslip, we're not necessarily looking at the income of one individual in the household. If there are multiple incomes in a household, where maybe there's a young adult who's working, still living with their parents, and that income contributes to the household income. All this income is put together as trying to establish what the income of a house is. And it's on that basis that the affordability and the ability to repay of the loan would be made. Considered also is the repayment behavior. Repayment behavior based on past history. If this is a client who's already been the borrower who's been an existing client of the microfinance institution, and they've proven their ability to repay the loan for the small business, this same repayment behavior is going to be extended in terms of assessing the ability to repay for a construction loan. An important consideration then is what is being financed really feasible? What is it that they want to finance? The loan amount they're requesting for, and what it is that needs to be constructed. Is it realistic? Is there any information to quantify the cost of the materials, the cost of the labor? So understanding and assessing this feasibility allows to confirm the loan amount and also the likelihood that the loan is going to be repaid based on the assessed household income and the cash flow in terms of the pattern in which the cash flow comes into the household. So these different elements are all considered first when designing the product, but also at each level when a potential borrower is coming to actually apply for the loan, because we're not using any of the traditional means of where's your pay slip? Can we look at your bank statement? Because the target market for your housing microfinance institution is not going to have this clearly documented income level through a bank statement or a pay slip. So all these different pieces of information are put together, and this is part of an existing and predefined model to actually assess whether a client would qualify for a housing microfinance loan, and is supported by the appropriate product design. In terms of the institutional and the operational requirements, that's with regards to the systems that need to be put in place for an institution to be ready, relating to the institutional readiness that had referred to in the first few minutes. So there's minimum institutional and operational requirements that will need to be in place for an institution to comfortably venture into housing microfinance, depending on what its starting point would be. At a very high level, there needs to be a board undertaking or understanding that they do want to go into this market segment of housing microfinance. The key considerations for this is that venturing into housing microfinance needs to be well aligned with the mission of the organization and its vision, which tends to get their direction from the board. So there needs to be really a buy-in and alignment from the board before venturing into housing microfinance. The reason being, as I shared right at the beginning, is that there will be significant changes and investments that will need to be made by an institution. The board is going to be the one to sign off on those changes, investments, and strategic direction that the institution is going to make. So an organization would be making a mistake to venture into housing microfinance without having the buy-in and alignment at the highest level of the organization, in particular by the board, understanding that this is a product they want to venture into, have an understanding of the risk and return that housing microfinance would make, and ensure that it's really strategically aligned with the mission and vision of the organization. What then this means with regards to the risk appetite and clarity is that there needs to have been sufficient assessment and documentation of exactly what does venturing into housing microfinance mean for the institution with regards to its capital requirements, how much of its capital or how much of its portfolio is the institution prepared to ring fence or be tied up into housing microfinance, and what that's going to look like for the balance sheet for the institution, because the loan tenures are going to change quite significantly depending on what the existing portfolio of the institution is before it ventures into housing microfinance. Even more so, in part related to the staff training and incentives, there needs to be clear product ownership and accountability of the housing microfinance product. This becomes more important if the housing microfinance product is being introduced in an already existing or crowded portfolio of products. If it's going to be given the right resources and attention to succeed, there needs to be a product owner accountable for its performance and also who's got the right level of seniority and clout in the organization to ensure that the housing microfinance product is given the right resources and attention, especially during the initial feasibility, product design, and pilot stage, so that it's given the best opportunity to succeed in what might be a resource light context, which is the case in many organizations. One of the challenges that institutions have when they introduce a new product, design the product, launch a pilot, is the lack of clearly defined targets, timelines on what success is going to look like, to say that the product has failed or succeeded, and at this point we are ready to scale. So these performance targets need to really be defined early in the process as a new product is introduced. And even beyond that, this also needs to be monitored well to understand, for instance, what size of our portfolio are we going to allow to be exposed to housing microfinance? How many of our clients, how many new clients do we want to target from outside our existing client to onboard on the new housing microfinance product? So these are governance and strategic decisions that need to be made at the onset of introducing the product, but also on an ongoing basis to try to ensure its success and long-term sustainability. Around the risk management and internal controls, some of the elements that are already touched on is ensuring that there's a mechanism to allow for monitoring of construction to ensure that the loans which are directed towards housing are used for housing and specific purpose on housing. One might wonder the level of monitoring, and also with regards to even the risk of diversion mitigation, the level that an institution is going to invest in these internal controls or risk management mitigation tools depends on, to a great extent, what other underwriting mechanisms does the institution have with regards to, is the loan repaid, is the loan paid as a single amount? Is it paid in tranches? Is it paid to suppliers? So these monitoring for construction and diversion are really put in place as part of the whole process for the institution with regards to the underwriting mechanism and the product design. In terms of early warning indicators that flag emergencies around around the portfolio potentially going wrong, these are really linked to the construction monitoring and diversion. Early warning indicators of a housing product potentially going wrong would be related to the quality of the construction. So early in the rollout of a product, if it becomes evident that the quality of the construction that is being undertaken through the loans that you're being dispersed is of low quality, this is an important indicator, or that there is diversion. It's an early warning sign on the ability that the loans are going to be repaid and what the portfolio quality would look like further down the line. So all these elements are actually quite specific or related in terms of trying to mitigate the risk, and having the institutional capacity to put in place these internal controls is part of the assessment that is undertaken as part of the readiness assessment I had talked about earlier on. You cannot manage that which you can't measure, so the saying goes. So for you to be able to measure and manage the risk of housing, you need to have the right metrics in place, and hence the point earlier of having an MIS that is able to ensure that you can disaggregate and measure the performance of your housing loan portfolio. The reporting is useful for the whole purpose of being able then to manage the risk and put in place the relevant internal controls. With regards to the MIS, what are the hidden drivers? Having insights into these elements gives you really the hidden drivers to scale at the time that you want to decide that, okay, we've got a viable product and we want to scale up. Having the right information, the data in your MIS becomes critical. So at a very minimum, what is the sort of information that you would want your MIS to be able to track? Portfolio segmentation to ensure that the housing portfolio is reported on distinctively. You would also want to ensure you don't want to make a decision on your product designed to say we won't be able to do tranche payments because our MIS does not allow it, even if your assessment shows that that is the best one of the mechanisms to underwrite your portfolio. So this at the very minimum, you would want to ensure that the MIS is really agile enough to allow you to track loan values and disperse as you see fit based on the product design itself, and not have limitations based on the MIS. You also want in your MIS, for instance, to be able to tag specifically what it is that your housing microfinance loan is going to be used for, because this is information that becomes critical further down the line to say, which use cases should we focus on? Which ones do we think are risky? Which ones should we have a different process for? So only over time being able to track different performance, different metrics based on what the loan was used for becomes important. You want to have your MIS to be able to have that granular level of tagging or tracking of loan based on usage. Information around construction, monitoring, diversion, all this is information that you would want to see that your MIS allows you to have this set level of reporting and deep dive into your data for analytic basis. In terms of reporting, how are you able to capture information from the field? This is a capability that might seemingly be nice to have for different types of products, but becomes quite critical in housing microfinance. If we're saying that we want to be reporting, especially around whether the loan is used for the intended purpose, the quality of the construction, ability to be able to collect this information and reporting it from the field becomes quite critical. So really, this is just at a very high level. When you talked about that, you need to have an MIS system that is agile and adaptable to housing microfinance. These are just some of the minimum capability or matrix that you want your MIS to be able to track. One other element I would include here, for instance, which becomes also critical, in housing microfinance, and with the understanding that there is a gender dimension to access to financing for women in particular, is ensuring that this information also for the clients can be gender disaggregated has increasingly become an important metric if we especially are looking to have a housing finance product that can specifically empower or increase access to affordable housing finance for women. Being quite conscious of the time and leaving time for some discussion at a very high level here, this just indicates the sort of development areas that an institution would need to invest in before rolling out a housing microfinance product, because this is going to inform part of the credit appraisal system that the institution would put in place. Around incentive considerations, as I had referred to, is you want to incentivize not only volume, but also the quality of the portfolio and what is the outcome or impact that you're having for the households or the clients that you're financing. Over time is also whether the product is growing, is it scalable, is it sustainable? So these are some of the metrics that need to be considered in the incentive scheme for the loan officers or field officers, client interfacing officers who will be working on a housing microfinance product. In this session and similarly last time, we talked of the housing microfinance because it's cutting across different thematics. It's around finance, it's around public sector, utility access. It's also trying to bring all these different elements together. It's around construction. It's not the type of product which microfinance institutions can successfully drive on their own. So having in place different types of partners, depending again on your starting point, the context and the market that you're serving, can make for a successful product when it comes to the return, is it efficient, and also its scalability. So this just speaks to some of the partnerships that would be considered, and we can unpack some of these in the Q&A. The value of effective partnerships, what do they bring? Better construction quality, better quality products or houses constructed will also result into a better quality portfolio. Reduced loan diversion with regards to is the financing in cash or into materials. This improved client outcomes, especially with regards to better quality housing that is financed, will improve the household living condition in terms of client outcome. All this does contribute to a strong portfolio performance. There is significant traction that housing microfinance allows between the client and the financial institution. So it's a product that really helps entrench and build trust. Partnerships can help scale other than through the network effect in terms of just the value added, the additionality that partners would bring as opposed to an institution trying to introduce a housing microfinance product on its own. For the lessons from the field, this would be an opportune time for me to hand back to Stephen, who could share some of his experience over the years, and some of which I've had the opportunity to be working with him in recent years.
We're on the lessons learned in the field, basically.
Right.
That one of the key aspects that is very key, that demand exists, but what product are we offering? The demand for housing is right there. We see the number of houses that are being built without any financing. Structured financing is happening. MIS drives scale and drives an institution to see how the product will work well. Then incentives that are put in place essentially shapes behavior of the staff. Then product accountability and tracking becomes very, 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 very important. Then scaling has always to be aligned with the institutional alignment. Scale comes with how well is the institutional architecture. Is it well aligned? Is the housing part of the strategic product, or is just a footnote? How well are the institutions investing in the staff development? The non-financial services that complement housing. How is the institution other products. If the institution is not bothered about products other than values and disbursement, not products, it always becomes very, very a big challenge. And how well an institution is working with other partners. Does it have the competence of working with other players in the housing ecosystem or whatever? If it's agriculture, how is its experience in the value chain financing? That is where now these competences come in very, very handy. Then what is the strong leadership? Is this leadership from the board and the executive, is it all aligned? So that gives a very good impetus of any new initiative. What is the buy-in at the highest level in the institution? Do the senior management see it as a priority, or they don't even talk about it? They don't ask for reports about it. Then who are the staff to implement it? It just dies a natural death for that matter. So just on the questions, one of the questions that Keisha, you had raised is in regard to the price. And one of the key things that most institutions, when they are pricing and they see housing is coming to leverage on already existing practice and delivery mechanism, housing is not going to change on how they do business. It's just that they are now product focused and seeing how does it fit on how general they do business. And when they understand the loan process and looking at how they come up with pricing, looking on how the delivery of the loan process is, and in most cases, it's not different. It's just because it's just a housing product, they do business assessment. They follow the same process. If it's group lending, individual lending. So the whole loan process doesn't change. It's just that the end use of what the money is being used. And because most of the housing microfinance loans are between 600 to 1,000 loan, that is the average loan size. So the loans are not that outrageous that should make an institution feel jittery that the amounts are outrageous because they have just called housing. So these loans are essentially at most between $600 to $1,000 averagely. Because when you look at most of the clients, housing always comes number 3 or number 4 on their priority list. So they must have covered all the other interests. So if they have covered the other interests, then housing just comes in what is the residue. So they will not also want to have big loans, and that's why they want to build incrementally, because they have other conflicting household obligations that they have. Then, Judith, you raised the question in regard to the full house. One of the key things, designing a housing product, you have to understand who is your client. What do they want? What do they prefer? What is this that they can afford before you supply? So using a full-fledged that you have a house that is going to cost $2,600, you are approaching it from the supply-driven. But housing microfinance is the demand-driven. So it at least changes the perspective, seeing what is the clients, can the clients afford this 2,600 full house solution? Maybe they'll want it in a phased manner because they cannot afford a full solution. Then what is the institution? Can they take that loan of 2,000 and how long will it take? And with the target client, because the target client has an influence of what the risk appetite for the institution is going to look like. Paris, you asked on the question of how do you assess expenditure? So housing doesn't change on how loan appraisal is being done, because what is going to be appraised is what is the enterprise that the client is running. And is that enterprise, that is what is going to support the housing development they are going to undertake. So it's not going to change on how a loan appraisal is being done, because we have to assess the enterprise that is going to support the housing development that are going to be used. So best looking at if they have bank statements, they have M-Pesa statements, is based on what the institution has taken, on what it accepts as what of the backup that gives them confidence of what the client. And most of the clients who are building either the informal sector. So they might not have bank statements, but they might have an M-Pesa statement or a mobile account that they are running. So using other alternatives based on who the client are you targeting. Are you targeting a salaried? Are you targeting a client? And most of these institutions working with this segment, they understand that client segment and they have a mechanism of how they underwrite. So it is not changing any business currently on what they're doing. Then, Margaret, you raised the issue of housing and debt settlement. Most of the aspect is when we look at a client who is all anchored on what is it that they are doing. That is what motivates the type of housing development that you are going to finance. So everything is anchored on livelihood or enterprise that the client is undertaking, and how much can that enterprise that is generating money, how much can it absorb with the additional housing loan, which is not going to generate money, but is the enterprise that is going to support the housing development. Then, Titus, you raised the question on the delivery process. This is all factors on how an institution, after it maps out the housing journey and the loan process, that is what will guide on how the costing will be done. And in most cases, institution will always continue using the same methodology they have used in delivering, whether it's individual or group. So you'll always find most institutions will always want the housing loan to be priced less than the enterprise loan, because the housing loan is not a productive loan, but a consumption. So you'll always find there's always some differentiation on that pricing aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm sure we've not exhaustively covered all the questions, but we were also hoping for today if there will be any experience for any of the participants on what has worked or not worked, and we'll be keen to hear your views.
I have a question. I heard Stephen's answer, but one of the questions that often comes back to me, and I think it's worthwhile, is like this housing microfinance thing is like so complicated. And it takes all of the efficiencies of the mortgage are like lost. And does that not make it more expensive?
There was a question to that effect.
Yeah, yeah.
How would I answer this? First, I think there's an ideological perspective on housing microfinance, in the sense that most of the institutions that are involved in housing microfinance would not necessarily be coming from it from a financial return perspective only. So it's not the impact of the inefficiencies are not necessarily added on as an additional price, but they reduce more of the gap or the margin for the institution, because the institution is also really trying to measure the return from a social impact perspective. Because in the absence of all these inefficiencies that we've mentioned, it means that we are not actually going to provide financing for the low income market segment at all. So it's not so much necessarily around can it be delivered profitably, but more around can it be delivered sustainably. So the returns on housing microfinance, few investors going to housing microfinance for the perspective of making a profit, but that it can be done sustainably. So the inefficiencies definitely do reduce the return on investment.
Okay, so then for a lender who is totally return focused, for them, housing microfinance would be a bit of a loss leader to give them access to other markets.
Yes, it would be, and also maybe one area that we've not necessarily differentiated even when we talk of housing microfinance. There are many lenders who've gone into housing microfinance to finance the low income but formally employed.
Okay.
So there's payroll lending for housing microfinance, for instance. So there, the returns can be significant, highly profitable, but then the additionality in terms of bringing in the unbanked into housing, there's less argument to be made that we're contributing towards that.
Okay. Okay, cool. I see there's a question from Judith.
Yes, hello everybody. Sorry for my strong French accents. I just had this question because reading the participant reflections, I understood that we had quite a hybrid profile since we are not an MFI. We work with them, but we are at the beginning a developer, a building developer, gathering all the stakeholders around the table so that sustainable and affordable housing can be achieved at the same time. And the biggest challenge for us, so if I had to answer to the second question, but applied to us as a hybrid actor, would be this design of the financial products, to what extent it should be done, I mean, to what extent it should be co-designed between us and the MFI, knowing that we are a building developer. Like, to what extent we should intervene in the process, knowing that we are a building developer, but that we are also bringing to the table GFIs, guarantee, concessional resources. For us, the big challenge is the methodology. How do we go into this design, and which role, which importance each actor has to have somehow. I don't know if my question is clear or not.
Even you want to take that? I believe we had a variation of this question during the last webinar. I think in terms of the role a developer can, what partnership can a developer have in place with the housing microfinance provider?
Yeah, one of the aspect that has worked well with some of I say some of the institutions I've worked with that have also worked with the developers. One of the aspects that is very key, that the whole conceptualizing the financial institution should be initially at the table, should not come in towards the end. So the whole thinking and aligning how the cost you are looking at, the target client that you are looking at, will it be appealing to that institution? Is that segment that institution is working with? So all these discussions need to be happen prior, so that you see which are the institutions you can partner with, that you are aligned.
Okay, thank you.
And Judith, if I can just have a clarification, did you mention that you're working with an NGO? Because I think understanding this market segment, the target segment, could help understand exactly what the collaboration would look like.
Yeah. Actually, in the Nubian Vault, we were at the beginning an NGO. Now we are a group. And our product is actually already spread in a lot of West Africa countries. So the demand is here. We're just trying to facilitate the encounter between the clients and the MFIs for the whole model to be more sustainable in the long run. So we are the builders, but we are also the gatherers, if I may say so, on a product which is actually already known and quite spread.
Okay, thank you for the additional clarification. It would be good to still maybe engage offline to get a bit more information.
Yeah, with pleasure.
Kesha, being conscious that we've come to the top of our 1.5 hours,
Indeed, we
would like to hand over back to you.
Okay.
Well, noting that we will have a session in a couple of weeks' time again.
Yes, I think you've got one more slide that shows that to remind everybody on that. So maybe you want to go to that one. This was really very interesting, and I'm sure that there's a lot of further questions that will come. Can people send through? How did you do it last time? Can people send you emails, or how will you receive questions? If people come up, one of us is going to wake up at 2 a.m. and have something that we didn't understand. It's probably going to be me.
I would encourage everyone to go to the AUHF website. The presentation of last month and this one will both be there, and our contact details are there. I've got the slide there with our contact information. We will try to see if we can get a transcript of the recording and see the questions that we might not have answered. And we may coordinate with Tandiwa and maybe just send a summary of the presentation and any key questions that still remain unanswered.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Stephen, any comments from your side? Oh, you're muted, Stephen.
I think it all calls for alignment and understanding who the end users are, what they want, what they prefer, and what they can afford is what informs the product. They are just those three simple things, but when you unpack them, it's tons and tons of issues that you wrestle with.
I was going to say, not so simple. Those are very important things, but not so simple. How does anyone know what anyone earns and can afford, and as it changes? And that takes a sensitivity, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And Bezant, a last word from you.
Just this slide I rushed to put back on, I think, in terms of closing insights. Product innovation alone does not scale. I think more importantly is around the institution needs to realign itself and have a different vision, I think, as it decides to enter into housing microfinance. And an important consideration on that is that institutions don't need to do this alone. If there's an area where strategic partnerships are key in the financial inclusion microfinance space, it's in housing microfinance. Seek out the right strategic partners, and then I think the challenge of delivering will be significantly reduced.
Excellent. No, that's great. And just to remind everyone, I put a message on in the chat early in the top of the list, early in our session today. We are compiling an innovation catalog. Stephen and Bezant, pay attention to that too, please. There's a link there for submissions. A company is not an innovation. The innovation is the thing they do. So companies can submit more than one innovation if they want. And we want to put together a good, thick catalog to show everyone just how innovative this affordable housing sector is. So please, everyone, take a look at that. Thank you so much for your input and for guiding us through this material. Really looking forward to the next one, scaling the housing microfinance from pilot to portfolio, and to think carefully about what that means for everyone's own individual context as well. Thanks. And thank you for questions, everybody. Nice to have a bit of a discussion.
Thank you, everyone. Looking forward to seeing most of you in a month's time, hopefully.